Hello everyone, welcome to the video. My name is Maze and today we are going to be making this custom box. So if you remember in our last video in this series, this is where we left off with a nice simple and sturdy plywood box. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link to it in the description and in the cards. And so let's customize it. So without further ado, let's make some dust. So first thing I did was install the hinges. These are barrel hinges, and these are the easiest hinges to install I've ever used. I'm probably going to use these a lot in the future. The only problem is they said they were 1/2 inch, but they're actually 12 millimeters, and I had to order a new Fastener bit so that they would fit. So first thing I needed to do to get the look that I wanted was to make the top bigger than the bottom. So I'm cutting some strips of plywood so I could attach them to the top to make it wider. And here I am sizing it up on the actual piece itself. You can see throughout this build that most of the time at this point of a build I'm not really measuring anything. I'm always just using the piece. I don't use a ruler. I actually use the thing that I'm building it for, make it a little bit bigger than I need, and then just trim it to size. So here I am just gluing and screwing the sides on, and I'll trim everything up once the glue's dry, and I'll replace the screws with dowels like I did in my last video. Now one of the things I made a mistake at this part is I'm hammering the dowels in just all the way, and what I should be doing is after that flushing them in from the inside, hammering them back out until they're flush on the inside, because they're really hard to trim up on the inside of the box. And then I'm just using a flush trim router bit to make sure everything is flush and the same size. This is a lot easier than just measuring it and trying to be super precise. This is the most precise way you could do it. And then it's just sanding. So the client wanted an M on the box, so I'm just made something on Inkscape and printed it out and gluing it to the wood. It's going to be for a baby shower, and the baby's name is going to start with M, so you wanted an M on the box. And I just took it to the scroll saw and cut it out. I lost that footage. I know it's, hard to believe with the quality of my videos, but I am an amateur and did not push record when I had planned on it. So here I am it's hard to get into a letter like this with a router, so I'm just using a hand file to round off all the edges. And then I sand what I can with the orbital sander. What I can't get with the sander, I'll hand sand. And then I'll glue and screw everything together. This is one of the moments where this technique really works out, because it would be hard to clamp this. You'd have to have special, really long clamps that doesn't make sense to buy those just for one project. And here you could just glue and screw it and then replace it with the dowels, and when you're painting it, no one will ever know. And you don't need like a brad nailer or any special clamps. You could just do it with the drill you already have. And you can see here I learned my lesson, and I'm hammering the dowels back out and flushing them up with the inside of the top. And then I'm cutting a piece of plywood and then cutting into strips. I'm going to be making the bow, and the bows are fun to have because people are impressed by them, and they're really not that difficult. You just draw that shape onto the wood and you cut them out on the scroll saw. And how many of these you make depends on how big you want your bow. I made 5 of them, but I only ended up using 4. And so that's what it looks like when it's all cut out. And I took my 4 and I glued them together. Then once that's dry, you can go back to the scroll saw and cut out your bow shape, your profile. And then I go back to the belt sander to carve it out. You don't really want to use any hand chisels on plywood like this. They just dulls your blade way too fast. So I just use a belt sander to do most of my carving for things like this. And it's just by eye. It's just by what you think looks good, and round everything off until you get a shape that is a bow and is pleasing to your eye. And then I go cut out the ribbons for the bow. I just drew these by hand, just eyeballed them. So here I'm taking that part, and that little tab is going to go in between the ribbons, the loops of the ribbons. I'm just going to make like a half lap joint. It doesn't have to be super tight, but it's got to fit. So right now I'm fitting it onto the fitting that joint together, and then I'll just smooth out the ribbons and kind of give them more of a ribbon shape, thin them out a little bit and make them kind of flow. And then I just cut out a square that fits in between the two loops of the bow and round it off and give it some shape. And then there it is, attached to the box. I shouldn't have attached it at this point, but I wanted to see what it looks like. But it's going to be getting in the way a lot soon. I'm going to end up taking it off and then putting it back on later. So now I wanted to add some strips of wood to look like, ribbon from unwrapping paper. I wanted 1/8 inch plywood, but when I went to my hobby shop, they were all out of it. So I got 1/8 inch basswood instead, and it ended up splitting a lot when I was using the glue and screw technique. And so I ended up using some painter's tape to help hold everything together and to repair the wood when it's split. These things they're decorative, so they're not going to be bearing any weight or anything. So I think with the glue and screws and the tape holding it together, it should be fine. And this is what it ended up looking like. I was real happy with it. It looks legitimately like a present, and the client was happy with it, and so now it was time to prep it for paint. And so first thing we need to do is sand everything. Since we're painting it, and for a primer you only need to sand to 120. And again, the bow's still on there. I should have taken it off. I'm going through all this trouble to go around it when it would have been easier just to do it separate. But yeah, sand everything to 120. And it was right about here that I found out with my little ribbon strips that my box wasn't opening correctly anymore, so I had to just trim those down a little bit. This is part of making custom things. So all these little things pop up you didn't think about, but they're usually an easy fix. And then I use wood filler to fill in any cracks, any crevices, the screw holes on the ribbons, the dowels, just anything I think there might be any crack or any hole that would show up in the primer. I just fill it in, and you can't really do too much here. You'll end up just sanding it off if you do too much. So you could waste it, but you can't put too much. And again, ribbon's in the way. And then you let that sit for a while and harden up, and then you get to sand it off. I'm using a sanding pad and some paper, and I'll also use the putty knife as a card scraper to get into corners and get everything flush. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is like the rough draft stage. I'm still just building it up. then I'll do my first coat of primer. This is a really thick coat. I'm just trying to fill in any cracks and gunks and just really put a very thick coat on there. And again, the bow is in the way, but I keep trying to work around it. But it ain't gotta be pretty here. It just has to be thorough and thick. And I let that dry overnight just to make sure, because it's a little bit thicker than normally would be, and it's looking pretty good. And so I'm still haven't realized that the bow is in the way. And then I wake up the next day and I'm like, you know what, let me just take the bow off and work on it separate. And then I sand it all down. I'm using 120 still, a little bit on the aggressive side. I'm not worried about, you know, if there's bare wood coming through. I'm not worried about if it chips off or anything. I'm still just building up a layer, and so use the putty knife as a scraper and just get it smooth as I can. More get it ready for the next coat than actually get it smooth. And then it's another coat, not as thick as the first one, but a little bit thicker than normal. Again, this is kind of just a early stage of just trying to get a consistent cover of primer that I could work with. And so this is what it looks like, kind of on the thick side. It's the end of like phase 1, and now my phase 2 is I'm trying to get it all smooth. So again, I'm using the sanding pad and actually using a card scraper now instead of the putty knives, and I'm just trying to take down some of the peaks, I guess, of the coat of primer. And so here's what it looks like after I do all my sanding and scraping. The peaks are gone, but there's still the valleys. And so now I'm moving to a sponge brush. Before I was using a bristle brush, which lays on more paint. This still leaves brush marks, but they're a lot smoother and a lot finer, so I'm switching to that now. And it's just another coat of paint, but I'm just trying to put on another, or a regular coat of paint, and trying to smooth it out. And here's what it looks like after that coat. And then I'm going to do my last major sanding with the orbital sander. I move up to 220 because I don't want it to be as aggressive, but I want to sand everything just as smooth as possible, and I don't care if some wood shows through at this point. I just want everything to be as smooth as I can get it. And it ends up looking like this. And then now I'm on to the final stage of prep work. And again, I'm using a sponge brush, and this time I'm really paying attention to trying to get a smooth, even coverage. This is the last coat of primer, and I'm using just long strokes to try to get as smooth as possible. I'm just trying to cover it up and cover any wood that's exposed. The surface I'm starting with is nice and smooth, so all I have to do is not screw it up. I just have to not have any drips or too much in any spot, but I just smooth, flat, long strokes. And then it's all hand sanding from here with the sanding pad and some paper for the parts the pad can't get, but just very lightly. I'm trying not to go through anything. I'm just getting rid of any of the brush strokes that I put on there with that last coat. And then there's the prep surface, nice, flat, prepped, sanded to 220, so it's got enough for the paint to grip to, but it's just nice and smooth. And so then I'm taping up the parts that I don't want to get on the first coat, and you just use I use a utility knife and some painter's tape and just tape up all the parts I don't want to get painted. And that's what it looks like. And I just threw the bow on there, set it on there to see what it looks like, because I thought it looked pretty good in white and blue. But the baby shower is for a girl, so I went with the client to go get some colors, and we picked out some colors that he liked. This is called Mystic Mist or something like that. It looks white, but it has like these hints of purplish lavender color, so it's a very good kind of base color. So I do 2 coats of that all over. You know, with the tape you don't have to worry too much about it. When you do remove the tape, you should get a razor blade or your utility knife and kind of cut along the edge of the tape, so that you cut away any paint that's connected. It'll help you with the tear out. There'll still probably be some. I still had some on here, but it prevents it as much as you can. And then I taped it up again for the other parts that I wanted to paint. This time I'm going to paint the ribbons, and painting them this pink, this kind of baby light pink color. And then I paint the bow too. And then I do the same thing, and I painted the M, but gray. And that's how it turned out. Now my edges aren't as crisp as I would like. Normally what I would do is I would take another day or two and go with the razor blade and a really small just painter's brush and just paint any of those edges that aren't good, and use the razor blade as kind of a like the painter's tape as like a block from getting any other colors mixed. But we didn't have time, and the client understood that he didn't really give me enough time to do it right, so I did the best I could, and he was happy with it. And then I put a clear coat of polyurethane on there. You don't want to use shellac for this, because shellac kind of gives it a yellow color. And then I installed the hinges, and it was I was really impressed with these hinges. That lid is heavy, and it held up, and it didn't slam down on your fingers, and it held itself open. So now is the time where you want to hook up the bow, and you just drill the hole and dowel and wood glue it. Voila, it's done. And that's how it turned out. I was happy with it. I think I could have done better on the paint. If I had been given another week, I would have done the detail work and then put 4 or 5 more coats of the urethane on there so I could buff it out. But with the time given, I only had a week to paint it. I think it turned out good. The client was happy with it. Sometimes, we work so closely with these things that we see flaws in it that other people don't notice just because we're spending so much time with it. He didn't even see much of a problem with it. I told him because they're having the party, and then after the party he wants to give this to his granddaughter, and hopefully it will be something she has for decades, that I would repaint it after the party, but he didn't seem to think it was that big of a deal. So tell me what you think down below. Click like and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Also, I'm on Instagram now, so I think there's a link in the description if you want to check me out there. So thanks for watching, and support your local craftsmen and get out in your workshops and make your own dust.